You would basically complete one application for a scholarship, or one scholarship application, and it applies you to hundreds of scholarships that school's foundation holds. So it's a very efficient way to apply for scholarships, especially if you've got it narrowed down to a couple schools or even just one school. Now's a very good time to be making sure you're doing those scholarship applications, because those are institutional scholarships that are specific to that school that they will apply to your student account, and they can really go a long way. Outside scholarship opportunities, the major ones would be the Kansas Board of Regents that I would like to make sure everyone is aware of. The Kansas Board of Regents has several scholarships that they award to students. The one that you may have heard of a little bit more is the Kansas Scholars Scholarship. That is one that K-Board would notify you of as a student if you meet the qualifications for that scholarship. All the other ones, you would go to the Kansas Board of Regents website and apply. Those have varying deadlines. Some of them are in April and May, but I would take a peek at the K-Board website. If you go to Student Financial Aid on that website, you can check out a few of those opportunities as well. I always like to mention, there's local organizations, I'm sure, here in Marysville that may offer some kinds of scholarship opportunities. Probably speaking with your counselor is your best bet to know what some of those opportunities are. And I know this area is out of the Dane G. Hansen area. Is that correct? Dane G. Hansen does not apply to this area. Okay, sorry. But the other reminder that I like to say when it comes to outside scholarships, so an outside scholarship would be anything that's not coming from the college that you are applying or that you are attending. So anything that's coming from an outside entity. Sometimes if you apply for those and you're awarded them, they may give you, as the student, a check. They may send the check to the school. They may write the check to both you and the school. It really kind of depends on the organization, but the main takeaway would be for an outside scholarship that the proper procedure for that would be that you take the check. If it's sent to you, you would take it to your financial aid office and they apply it to your student account balance. Now, if they write the check directly to you and you have cashed it or you already put it in your bank account, it's okay. Like, nobody's going to come after you or anything, but technically that is the proper procedure, just so you are aware. Okay, so the 2627 FAFSA. So FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and we'll talk a little bit later about what those types of aid specifically are. But it actually did open a little bit early this year, but generally it opens on October 1st of each year for the following year. So opening on October 1st, 2025 for 2627. So the website for that is studentaid.gov, and that's going to be where you do all things related to federal financial aid, is studentaid.gov. Just like most other websites, you would need to create login information, and on the packets that I've set out, there's these little white cards at the top that have both a parent FSA or federal student aid ID and a student FSA ID. It's just a good idea to keep track of this and keep it in a safe place, because the FAFSA does need to be done each year, and since it's something you really only do once a year, it's pretty easy to forget your password or your, what you have associated with that. The good news is it is also, when you set this up, it's associated with your email and phone number. So, for example, I have no idea what my FSA username is. I always log in with my email, or maybe even my phone number. When you set it up, it is also tied to your social security number and your date of birth. So I kind of refer to this process, setting up the IDs, as the most difficult process. Not because it is difficult, just because it's a very important part of the process, because it's associated with, those very specific identifiers. And if you put one of those things in wrong the first go around, it can be a little bit of a pain in the butt to reset it later. Not impossible, but just if you're not 1,000% sure on what your social security number is when you're typing it in, I would wait until a time when you are 1,000% sure, because I don't want you to have to call Federal Student Aid and wait on the phone with them. So you set that up generally about 24 hours before you plan to actually start the FAFSA. And what that does is just allow that process to check that social security number, date of birth, legal name, make sure all of those things match before the FAFSA started. Again, just kind of saves a little bit of headache on the front end there. The other thing the FAFSA will need is 2024 tax and income information. So this will actually pull in automatically when a contributor on the FAFSA provides consent it's called the IRS Direct Data Exchange, to pull in the 2024 tax and income information. If there is no 2024 tax and income information for it to pull in, then that's totally fine. It just performs that check to say, yep, there's nothing to pull in here, and you move on. But that consent does need to be provided on the FAFSA in order for that process to happen. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. Since this happens automatically now, you don't necessarily need to have a copy of your 2024, IRS 1040 in front of you, or your W-2s necessarily. If you want to have them handy to check some things for your own comfort, you're welcome to, or just maybe know how you might get a hold of those, just in case we would need to verify something, for example. But a school would let you know at that point in time if there was something that we needed to double check. The next part would be asset information, and this is a different category of time period that's reported on the FAFSA. So 2024 tax information, and then asset information is reported as of the day you're completing the FAFSA. And so the three asset question that it's going to ask both parent and student is basically the amount of cash or savings in your checking and savings account. Cash on hand would be, I think, the term that they use. With that field, I usually recommend to people, so it is as of the day that you do the FAFSA. So I maybe would not choose to fill out the FAFSA on payday. Maybe you wait until the bills are paid for the first of the month, that sort of thing. Because the purpose of this is that it is an accurate reflection of your financial situation, and that it's a snapshot as of that day, so they can accurately calculate a student's financial need. And the other thing I would like to say with that is that if you don't get it down to the cent, that's not, nobody's hunting that down to be like, it was supposed to be 777 instead of 775, for example. I mean, that's a very nitpicky example, but just get those numbers as close as you can to the best of your knowledge. The next question that'll ask for asset information is the net value of investments. And so that is going to be referring to stocks and bonds, the classic money market type of investments. It does not refer to any type of retirement account, an IRA, 401k, anything that is designated specifically for your retirement does not need to be reported on here. And there are these little circles with question marks next to every single question on the FAFSA, and this is a specific section that I highly recommend that people click on those because it will elaborate a little bit further on what should or should not be included. Because this is a section that I really do not want anybody including something that does not need to be included, because it can inaccurately reflect your financial situation. The third category would be the net value of a business or farm. Specifically, this refers to what they call an investment farm. This would not be your family's small farm that you live on and work, independently. This would refer to land that you maybe rent out or, have some other kind of income from that is not, your family. Livelihood, yes, yeah, because that sort of information is already being reported in your taxes, hypothetically. So it does not include. Like I said, the difference to that would be, like I said, if you're not farming it yourself, you're just renting it out or have some kind of other arrangement. This would be a situation that I would recommend speaking with your tax professional if you have one. And again, just making sure that you're not including anything in this section that doesn't need to be. And it is always the net value. So if, the total value minus the debt would give you the net value. So, and there are some built-in protections in this section that they protect a certain portion of that type of both your income and these assets as well. Yeah.
So I think last year there was just a question, because it was all brand new last year.
Yeah.
Like for farmers.
Yes.
So we are not including, we own $6 million
Right.
worth of farm ground,
Mhm.
because that is where your livelihood comes from.
Yeah.
But it's like if you bought a piece of land for recreational purposes, is that kind of how you take?
I think they'll talk about like rental properties and things like that. That would definitely be included.
Like if you were renting
If
out
it's
for
part
someone
of-
to hunt on or something like that.
Yeah, that would be something. But again, I think it depends on how you have income from that reported. If it's included in your income on your taxes, that is not something that you would want to be reporting twice, for example. So there was definitely, so last year you did have to report the value of like a small family farm, for example, but they have come out this year and said you absolutely do not have to do that. So there has been a little bit of back and forth. The government decided that last year was not correct. This is the way that they'd like us to proceed moving forward. So, like I said, it can be a pretty complicated section. I really would just, recommend,
Just
yeah.
to reiterate,
Yeah.
my husband's a farmer.
Yeah.
And he has livestock and he farms and he also farms for the people.
Yep.
So that's all on the income. So I don't have
Yep.
to say, okay,
Right.
we own this farm, we're paying on this farm, we're paying on this farm.
Right.
We don't have to do that in
No.
this part.
No, not anymore. Last year, hypothetically, you would have had to, but not this year. But, so what I've heard recommended is, if you look at your balance sheet that you might get from your tax provider, that's something that people sometimes use in this section, depending on what type of investments and, assets that a person does have. Sometimes that's helpful. But again, anything that's already being included, like in your adjusted gross income on your taxes, is not something that you would want to include in this at all. Because that would just disproportionately up your income when it's already being accounted for somewhere else. So something else that would not be included would be, because I think of assets as maybe, your home, your car, those sorts of things. The value of those are not reported on the FAFSA at all. The main thing that it would be reported is the like investment funds, that sort of thing. And again, only very kind of specific types. So that's where that circle with the question mark on it is going to come in handy on this section to make sure. And this section is manually put in as well. So it's, do your best with what you got. So sometimes I know we don't necessarily always have those exact numbers handy, or they can change a little bit day to day. Just do your best with what information you have at that point in time. Because when you sign the FAFSA, that's what you're signing to say is that I submitted this FAFSA with to the best of my knowledge with the information that I had. So that is that section. Then they have added another question, a part of income information about child support received, and this adds a third category of a time period that we're looking at to report on the FAFSA. So we have the 2024 tax and income information, the asset information as of the day you do the FAFSA, but child support received will be as of the most recently completed calendar year. So if you're filling out the FAFSA next week, that's going to be 2024 child support received. If you're filling out the FAFSA in January, that's going to be 2025 child support received. And it is specific about child support received, not child support paid. That is accounted for elsewhere in your taxes. It does something with your adjusted gross income, I believe, but I'm not a tax expert. Okay, so this is kind of the general timeline that you would be wanting to look at, the order of events, if you will, of what your FAFSA experience would look like. First, you would create your federal student aid IDs. And generally, that's going to definitely be the students, but it's also going to be at least one parent for most students. And pretty much one of the first things it's going to ask you to do when you log in is provide consent for that IRS to pull in that information using the direct data exchange between federal student aid and the IRS. And then it's going to ask a few demographic questions. And I do always like to point out that those questions do not impact your federal financial aid eligibility in any way. They will ask questions about gender and ethnicity, those sorts of things. That is just data for them to have. On the back end, it's also not something that would show through, like when a school receives your FAFSA, schools do not see that information. I do believe that every question on there does also allow the option to say prefer not to answer, if you would prefer to do that. But again, does not impact your eligibility in any way, just a couple extra questions to answer on the FAFSA. The financial section that I mentioned there is really just talking about the assets. And if as a student, if that's all zeros, that is, or as a student or a parent, if those are all zeros, that is perfectly normal. I'd say a lot of FAFSAs that we see have zeros in those, so that's not a red flag or anything like that. Sometimes people are concerned about that. Like, does it look weird if I put all zeros? Because that's what my situation is. It absolutely doesn't. It doesn't put up any flags on our end or anything like that. Then the next section is going to ask about, I believe they've used the verbiage, personal situation and about your parents, which I'll get into a little bit more about what that exactly is referring to. But generally, it's going to be helping you determine who else needs to be on your FAFSA. And also determining if somebody else needs to be on your FAFSA. So at that point in time, that section kind of helps you decide, who else am I inviting to help me fill out my FAFSA. So in this scenario, and really all scenarios from with the FAFSA moving forward, the student starts the FAFSA, and then the parent invites the student invites the parent then, or at least one parent, to fill out the FAFSA and do their section. So you use that personal situation section to determine who you're sending this invite to, and then you send it. As a student, you would then sign the FAFSA, and then it's in the parent's hands. Parent would get a link via their email, and I believe to know the student, to invite the parent, would need to put in their name and maybe date of birth, and they don't need to put social anymore. That's changed this year. Because how many students know your parents' FAFSAs? Hopefully none. I'm sorry, your socials. But, and a valid email. So this is a very important piece of this, is making sure, parent is using parent email, student is using student email, because that's where it can get really complicated when, it sounds kind of silly, but we've had lots of situations where we see parent trying to log in as student and they don't realize it, maybe using the wrong information. So as long as everybody uses their information from the get-go, it should be a fairly clean process.
I have a real quick question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
But I have mine from one of my other socials.
Okay.
Okay, so.
Perfect.
But so just leave it alone.
Yes, you will not create a new one.
Well, I mean, I
yeah.
don't start the form.
No,
Let
you
my
don't.
son do it.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep. It kind of used to be that the parent could sort of start it and put it in. There was a whole FAFSA simplification. I don't know how much that got out and how much public news that was, but it was big news in our world, where they did a lot of work on the FAFSA 2 years ago. So last year and this year, there were some pretty major changes with that. So really, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room anymore with student needs to start it, invite the parent, and then parent logs in, pretty much does the same thing. You provide consent for that direct data exchange to pull in. Answer a few demographic questions. The financial section, again, is mostly just referring to putting in the assets manually. And then the parent signs and submits it. It would be perfectly possible the parent could sign it, save it, student could log in, look at it, and submit it. But at that point in time, a parent could submit it, would be the at least hypothetical order of events there. Just a couple of screenshots about what it's going to look like when you're logging in. If you're curious, there are when you select FAFSA form, it's going to ask you to log in, and you are identifying if you are the student logging in or if you are the parent logging in. As the parent, if you follow the link that is sent to you directly from the FAFSA that the student has invited you, it should take you directly to the parent part. But this is where I kind of was talking about, it can get a little messy if you're trying to log in as the student, but you're actually the parent, or vice versa. To make sure, because some of you may have more than one student in college this year, or next year, I should say. So when you log in as the parent, it will ask you to identify which student you're logging in for, to add your information to their FAFSA. And generally that's going to be the student's name, date of birth, and again, possibly social. Yes?
So if you have 2 kids going to college next year, would you need to link up your FAFSA twice, once for each child?
Yes, yep. So each kid would send the invite. You would get 2 different links sent to your email. You would follow one for student A, the other for student B, provide consent on each one, sign and submit on each one. Yep.
So, and that was a question I just had from another parent.
Mm-hmm.
if this is their second time doing it, the child still needs to
Yep.
start the process?
Yes. Yep. Yep. Now's also probably a good time to point out that there are 2 FAFSAs out there in the FAFSA world at any given time. So right now there's the 2025-2026 FAFSA out there for this current academic year, so current students can still do a FAFSA. You guys will want to make sure that you are specifically doing the 26-27 FAFSA. Again, the exception to that would be if you're going to a school that, well, actually that's not true. If you're going to a school that has summer as a header, you would definitely want to do the 26-27 FAFSA if you wanted to take classes during the summer, for example. Like if you graduate in May and you're like, I really want to take a summer class to get ahead or something like that, that would be the exception. If you were going to a school that had summer as a trailer, you would then want to do the 25-26 FAFSA to see if you're eligible for aid for the summer. Or you could pay out of pocket. You don't have to do a FAFSA for it. It would just be, if that was the situation, you would want to do that. Let's see. Again, just another couple screenshots of some of the things it's going to ask you for when you set up your FSA ID. Again, if you haven't already done so, if you already have an FSA ID from a previous or an older child going to college and filling out the FAFSA, you don't need to change anything with that. Maybe reset your password if you forgot it, because I know I've reset my password probably 40 times at this point. It's not too difficult. That's why it's connected to your email, your phone number. You can answer some questions to get back into your account. There's all kinds of different ways to reset your account, hopefully without having to call federal student aid. But this is, like I said, you put in your date of birth and social security number. I would always just at least look at this screen for like three times before you press continue on that to make sure that you have all the right information on there. Because like I said, it's just easier to set it up correctly from the get-go. Okay, so consent and the direct data exchange. It is required on the FAFSA in order for the FAFSA to move forward to the next step, be sent to schools and be reviewed, determine aid eligibility, consent must be provided by all contributors on the FAFSA in order for that to happen. So again, early on the application, I think it's pretty much the first thing that they show you. They will show you like a little short video on it, and there'll be some things for you to read through if you're not sure. Do I want to provide consent? Those types of things. It'll kind of give you the run through of what that all means. Also, if the first time through you decide that you, for whatever reason, did not want to provide consent and then later decide that you do, you can always log back into the FAFSA and provide consent later. So it's not like a one and done, oh no, I didn't provide it, my kid's not going to get aid because I didn't submit it. You can always log back in and provide that. I said required even if you did not file taxes in 2024. So that applies to both student and parent. You still need to provide consent in order for that piece to move forward. Just to provide some assurances on that, that is part of this FAFSA simplification, and the reason you may have heard of the data retrieval tool previously. It's now called the direct data exchange because it operates differently, and the way that tax information is pulled and protected is a lot tougher. And so if there was any concern about the protection of your data, it is there's different laws surrounding the way that is happening now, and it's more protected than ever. You won't see it on your screen. A student won't be able to log on to their FAFSA and see your information, and vice versa. The only people that would see it would be us as the financial aid administrators, and really only if we needed to make a change for some reason. If a parent calls and is like asking a question about student income, that's not something that we can share. Same thing as if student is calling asking about parent income on the FAFSA, that's not something that we could share. So there's a lot of protections in place surrounding this, which can sometimes be, I don't love that we have to have those conversations with students and parents of like, no, I'm not allowed to share that, but just if that's provides anybody with any piece about how protected some of this info is now. Like I said, you can go back in and provide consent. Like I said, the main takeaway is if you don't provide consent, the student will not be eligible for federal financial aid, which is fine. That's not, the end of the world either, but that is the end all be all on that. So any questions about providing consent on the FAFSA?
And it'll be pretty obvious, it'll say.
Yes, yeah. There'll be a box to check and then a button to press that I think says something about like I consent or something like that. Yeah, I think there's a video and then some things to read and then a checkbox and then it'll be kind of a whole deal. They'll make a production of it.
In the form.
Yes, within the form. Like I said, the demographic questions, you can always say prefer not to answer. Asset information, I have just a little bit more detail on here, kind of what we've already talked about, but just little reminders about it's always the net value when it comes to assets. Always remembering that not to put anything about your retirement in this, because again, it is manually put in. None of this is coming from taxes. This is all manually put in by you as the student for your asset situation and parent for the parent assets. That being said, the information that automatically pulls in after you provide consent, that is from 2024 taxes. But obviously, by the time you guys are going to school, it's going to be 2026 and and then eventually 2027. So with that in mind, there is a process in place to account for if your financial situation is different from 2024 to 2025 to 2026 or then even to 2027. Because, job changes, unemployment. We've had even somebody who had won the lottery in that previous year that was on the FAFSA, and they wanted to use a different tax year in order to get that taken out because it was a one-time thing. So there's all kinds of situations that might be a reason to look into a professional judgment, but most commonly it's a change in employment, a change in income. So if that is the case, what you would do is submit the FAFSA as it asks for it. Like you provide consent, it automatically pulls in that info. You wouldn't make any, there's not any changes that you would make at that point in time. Then you would contact the school that your student is going to, or if you are the student, the school that you are going to. And you would just basically let them know. You don't necessarily need to use the term professional judgment. You would just say, like, hey, my family's financial situation is different now, because of X, Y, Z. What do you need from me? And so what a school may ask for would be a more recent tax year, the 1040 from a more recent tax year. It may be, pay stubs, depending on how recent the change was and it just kind of depends on the situation. So that is why this is going to be a process that you would talk about more directly with the school that you are definitely going to. If you've narrowed it down to 2 or something, you could probably have that conversation with two schools just to see what that's going to look like. But basically what the financial aid administrators can do at that point is use the more recent information to change elements on your FAFSA. So that's where we would be logging in on our side of things and seeing which elements we could change based on the information that we have. And so that can and often does, given depending on the situation, can mean that a student is eligible for different types of aid or more aid. So just keep that in your back pocket if you know that your financial aid or your financial situation, especially with farming, we know it can change wildly from year to year. And we see that plenty, all the time in our, since we are in a farming community as well. So, would be a very common occurrence. The other one that I always like to throw out is that you can request a professional judgment if you have more than one person in your family in college. So my understanding is they do not take number in college into account on the FAFSA before. If you've done one previously, they probably asked you, how many people in your family, how many people are in college. So last year they still had the question on there, but it didn't impact aid. I think they have taken the question off since. So in order to combat that, you can request a professional judgment to say, like, hey, I've got 2, 3, 4 kids in college this year. I need to take that into account on my FAFSA somehow, or I would like to, you would request it. And the school what they would likely do in that scenario is request tuition statements or, tuition and fee statements from the school of the other child. and they would likely take that amount out of your adjusted gross income as far as it being on your FAFSA. So to account for that difference, since they no longer use that question in the calculation. So if that applies to you, I would, again, keep that in your back pocket. It never hurts to ask. And depending on the situation, it may or may not make a huge difference. It really just depends on all the other factors that are on your FAFSA, but it definitely can. So I would mention it if that's your case. So another question that we hear a lot is, am I a dependent student or am I an independent student? And the main difference between the two is that an independent student is not required to put parental information on the FAFSA. The FAFSA does have very specific questions that they use to determine whether or not a student is dependent or independent. It is not based on whether or not the student is exclusively, paying for college by themselves. It's not based on whether or not the student files their own taxes or anything like that, or if they're claimed as a dependent on their parents' taxes. Those are not things that they are considering with this definition. That being said, there are situations where there's a very clear reason why the student may not be able to provide parental information on the FAFSA, and for those situations, it's kind of a different category of a professional judgment. But students in that situation would again want to contact their financial aid office and let them know that, like, hey, I will not be able to get my parent to do the FAFSA specifically. This is kind of a reserved status process for students who have a pretty negative relationship with parents. There's a situation of abuse, neglect, abandonment, those sorts of situations. And again, that's a good one to talk directly to the school that you're going to. This is something that we have, as a school, we have lots of procedures on as far as how this is handled. Very delicate situation, obviously, but that it's all a confidential process and can result in, likely would result in the school determining that student actually is an independent student due to these the technical term that they use is unusual circumstances, and so then not requiring parental information on the FAFSA. So that conversation, again, has to happen directly with the school, and the school would then be needing some kind of documentation typically. It really depends on the situation. Obviously, there's a lot of different types of those scenarios, and it can be difficult to get third-party documentation, so it just kind of, again, depends on the situation. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So on that, would the student only do their FSA ID portion and then contact you, since a parent would not be asked?
Great question. So in that section where it talks about personal situation, this is part of that process. So they would actually be able to select a box to say that they would like to submit the FAFSA as a provisionally independent student. So that sends us a trigger to then contact the student and say, hey, here's our information about how you might, with some situations that may qualify for this. If one of these or something similar applies to you, please let us know. But yeah, then they would talk to us. But so they would still be able to submit the FAFSA. Yeah, and that is also new as of 2 years ago. So, or about a year and a half ago now, I guess. But yes, so they could still submit it. That way they can still have that process going. But yeah, anybody who is determined to be a dependent student, and the FAFSA will tell you, you'll answer the questions about your personal situation, and then at the very end of that, it'll say, you are a dependent student, please provide your parental information, or you are an independent student, you may, basically submit the FAFSA at that point in time. So these are the specific questions that are asked on the FAFSA to determine whether or not a student is independent or dependent, aside from the unusual circumstances, professional judgment type of scenario. But if a person is 24 years or older, if you're married, if you're supporting a child, or another dependent, which that would mean that at least 50% of that person's financial support comes from you as the student, either your income or benefits that you receive. If both birth parents became deceased or you were a ward of the court, or typically the more common word for that would be like if you were in DCF custody or in foster care, specifically after turning age 13, that is the verbiage that the FAFSA uses. So if you were in foster care, briefly maybe when you were a younger child, but not after turning age 13, this specific question would not apply to you. But anything age 13 or older would. If you're an emancipated minor or in a legal guardianship, like basically at the time of doing the FAFSA, if you were in those situations or had either of those statuses, if you're active duty or a veteran, or if you are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And that last one is also can be a little bit tricky. It would also require talking to the financial aid office. If you believe that situation applies to you, you would select that, and then also again would trigger the financial aid office to reach out to you and say, hey, you said that this was your situation. Would you be able to provide some kind of documentation maybe, or have a conversation about that so we can make the right determination on whether or not you filled out the FAFSA correctly. And my little disclaimer every year is that you should not do any of these things with the sole purpose of becoming independent on the FAFSA, because it is illegal. It is fraud, and it is punishable by law. There's always somebody who likes to kind of like, oh, I'll get married so that way I don't have to put my parental information on the FAFSA. Please don't do that. It's not worth all that. So just my little disclaimer. Okay, yes, so parents need to be invited by you as the student to be a contributor, and you start the FAFSA. Again, I do not believe yet you would need to put in their social security number anymore. It would just be their name and a valid email, maybe a date of birth, since they took out social security number. When it comes to who is a contributor on your FAFSA, there's a few different scenarios. If your parents are, like your biological parents, if they are married or unmarried and living together, then you're going to invite at least one parent to complete the FAFSA, assuming they file their taxes jointly. I don't expect most students to really have a whole lot of an idea of how their parents file their taxes, so now might be a good time to have some of those conversations. Because if they file their taxes married filing separately, both parents would then need to be invited to complete the FAFSA. And that is because of that consent piece. If you file taxes jointly, one person is able to provide that consent, and all of the necessary information comes in. If you file taxes separately, then both of those people would then need to provide consent for all the needed information to be on there. If your birth or adoptive parents are separated or divorced, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a legal separation, just considered separated, as your determination. At that point, you are picking a parent. You are not putting both of your biological parents on the FAFSA if they are separated or divorced.
I got one more question. So
Yes.
when he does it, he's going to have my legal name social.
No, not social. I'm sorry. This is not accurate. I don't believe they will not need to have the social anymore. I learned that at my presentation last night when I watched somebody do it. Yes. Yeah. Legal name and valid email, possibly date of birth. But not social security number anymore. They learned from some things last year that they decided didn't really work out real well. So, no, not social security number. So, like I said, if your parents are separated or divorced, you're picking one of your biological or adoptive parents at that point in time. And typically, it should be the parent that provides 50% or more of your financial support. That may be the person, like the parent that you live with primarily. It may be, the person who's paying for health insurance. It involves quite a few factors. Depends on what the child support situation may look like. This is absolutely a determination that you, as the family, would need to make. Again, it's not something that we would hunt you down and make sure that you did exactly the right way. We're not going to count pennies to be like, nope, he definitely did 51% and you did 49 or anything like that. And I know I've seen situations where it's a court ordered 50-50 exactly. So at that point in time, you are supposed to pick the parent that has the greater income and or assets. So if you're really not sure, this is the general order of operations of how you would decide. So at that point, that would be where you determine which biological or adoptive parent is going on the FAFSA. And then if that parent has since remarried or is currently remarried, then the step parent's information must be included on the FAFSA as well. And then we go back to if parents are married and living together, they file taxes jointly, only one of those people would need to be invited to be on the FAFSA. If they file taxes separately, then both the parent and step-parent would need to be invited to complete the FAFSA.
Okay, so if we
Yeah.
file jointly,
Yeah.
then like my husband doesn't need to.
He wouldn't need to like do an ID and log in and do
He
anything.
wouldn't,
No,
okay.
no. If you file jointly, then no,
Okay.
no. But I not indicating that this is the situation, but I was just about to mention I have seen several situations where a step parent is not the most likely to want to fill out a student's FAFSA or a step parent's FAFSA, and so I would, in those situations, again, it's a very personal decision of who's going on your FAFSA. You would, again, do what's best for you as the family. If you're like, I know I'm not going to be able to get this situation to work out, the other parent may be the better option to go on the FAFSA. Again, this is not something that we're not hunting down correctly parents on the FAFSA. This is up to you guys as the family to determine how this needs to go. So any other questions on that? This is probably the number one type of question that we get of who needs to be on the FAFSA and things like that. So, but again, definitely a very personal decision. Nope. Good? Okay. And also, I will have my contact information at the end if anybody has any questions or wants clarification on anything at all. Family size so there are basically three major components that determine how much aid or what type of aid a student may be eligible for, and that is the 2024 tax information, asset information, and family size. Those are the big three that determine how much aid or what type a student's going to be eligible for. So you will always include yourself. What we just determined on the previous slide of who your parent or parents are going to be, those are going to be a part of the family size. And then other children would also be included in the family size if they currently live in the household and the parents provide 50% or more of their financial support. Again, we're not going to hunt down exactly 50% or more. Use your best judgment. The exception to that would be you would include somebody in your family size if they are living apart because, for example, you have an older child who is also in college, and that is why they don't currently live in your home. But if you do provide 50% or more-ish of their income, you would include them in the family size. And the purpose of this is, $100,000 between two people is one thing, but $100,000 between five people is another thing. So that is why that is a major factor on the FAFSA. So this is not something that hurts you to be like, oh, I don't want to include somebody because it may hurt me on the FAFSA. It would only benefit you to accurately include people in your FAFSA or in your family size on the FAFSA. You would also include other people that are not children. The example I always use is maybe if grandma or grandpa lives in the same house with you. If they live with you and your parents in the same household and the parents provide 50% or more of their financial support. So if grandma lives in the household and parents are paying for, quite a few things, then that is somebody you would count in the household. If grandma lives in the household but her Social Security pays for everything, which I don't know that it would, but then that is somebody who you would not count in the household. So again, going to kind of just depend on what that situation exactly looks like. This definition does align a little bit more with who may be included on your tax return, it's reported as a dependent, so it's going to align more with the number of exemptions that would be on your tax return. And that being said, it will allow you to manually put in the number of people in your household. And I usually recommend that people go ahead and do that. If you're unsure at all, if your current family size matches what would be on your 2024 taxes, maybe somebody, we're like, oh, I can't remember if I claimed my older son that year or not, whatever it was. I would always just make sure that you manually put in that information because that would overwrite anything, the number of exemptions on the FAFSA, and it doesn't hurt you to do that at all. Okay, so the types of aid that you're applying for with the FAFSA, the big popular one is the federal Pell Grant. So right now the maximum award is, it's actually $7,398. At the time I made this, I wasn't 1,000% sure that it was going to be that. And so that would be, again, the maximum award. And so what that is, a student who would be eligible for the maximum award would be somebody whose FAFSA determined that, feel like I kind of skipped a step here. I'm sorry. The FAFSA spits out what's called a student aid index. You may have heard it referred to as a estimated family contribution previously. Now they call it a student aid index because it is not a number that you're expected to pay. It's not a number of the amount of aid that you're going to receive. It's just a number that we basically in our office would use to determine whether or not a student is eligible for Pell Grant or not and what their remaining financial need may be. So students with a 0 student aid index or lower, because it actually can technically go negative, would be eligible for a full Pell Grant. That would adjust as a student aid index gets higher, the amount of Pell Grant goes lower until it exceeds. If your student aid index is higher than the amount of the maximum Pell Grant award, at that point in time, you would not expect to receive federal Pell Grant. So there are a few other factors that kind of contribute to that may change that number, but generally speaking, Pell Grants, the eligibility that you have at Cloud County Community College is the same eligibility at Harvard. If you're eligible for a maximum Pell Grant, you are eligible for a maximum Pell Grant, and that does not change school to school. Some things that may change would be the federal, and I've mixed up a couple words here, but it's the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or SEOG affectionately. That amount is going to vary by school, and this fund does run out. Pell Grants, it's not something that they're running out of, or it's not something that we reach a max and we can no longer award. Versus this type of grant, it is specific to each school. For example, ours, it does specifically go to students who have a 0 student aid index or lower. And so right now, like ours is $400 or $200 per semester. At a different institution, it may be $500 per semester. It just kind of depends on what our award from the Department of Education was that year of what we're able to award. But currently ours is $400. Federal work study is another opportunity, another type of federal aid that is an opportunity to work while you're in school. Essentially, it operates very similarly to a normal job, except for it does not allow you to work during scheduled class time, which is great because the whole point would be we want you in the classroom. But it's very flexible with your school schedule if you're involved in activities, things like that. It's a great way to earn some extra cash and have a resume builder. So highly recommend that. Federal direct loans is probably the other kind of big ticket item as far as the FAFSA is concerned and federal aid. So there are 2 different types of direct loans, and the direct part of that means that it is a loan directly to you as the student, versus a Parent Plus loan is a loan directly only to the parent. So as far as student loans go, there are 2 different types, subsidized loans and unsubsidized loans. So subsidized means that it is the government is subsidizing the interest on that while you're in school. As for your purposes, it is not accruing interest while you're in school. Versus an unsubsidized loan would begin accruing interest at the time that it's awarded. Or the time that it's dispersed would be the correct verbiage on that. And currently, the interest rate, they've actually bumped it down just a smidge since last I just looked the other day. It's, I think, 6.48 maybe, but very kind of right around that 6.5 ballpark interest rate. Loans are a tool for students to accept or decline or request, depending on the school. And they're not evil, but it is something that you need to be very mindful about your borrowing. There are some limits, some kind of just built-in limits of how much you're eligible to borrow. So as a first-time freshman student, as we would call it, you would be eligible to borrow up to $5,500 your first year of school. And that would be split half in the fall, half in the spring. A portion of that could be subsidized loan, and the remaining amount would be unsubsidized. So obviously, depending on your school, that may or may not go incredibly far, but that is kind of, like I said, the built-in limits that they have with borrowing. It increases each year. So as a freshman, you can borrow $5,500. As a sophomore, you can borrow $6,500. And as a junior or higher, you can borrow $7,500. Again, always for the year, we would split that amount half in the fall, half in the spring. unless you were graduating in the fall or something like that. There's some different ways that may be calculated, but you would not be getting the full amount in one semester in pretty much any scenario. Any questions about federal loans while we're kind of looking at them? Okay. Parent plus loans. So the FAFSA would need to be done first, but then the parent could do a separate application still on the studentaid.gov website. And the main difference between a direct loan and a parent plus loan would be that these direct loans do not have a credit check on the student versus a parent plus loan does. And the borrowing limits look a lot different. A parent plus loan can actually go up to a school's cost of attendance, which I will talk about on this slide. And the main reason I want to talk about this is because your student aid offer from school to school may look different, and this can kind of maybe provide a little background on why. So all schools have a cost of attendance, and what that is a combination of direct costs that are paid directly to the school, like your tuition and fees, your books, on-campus housing, that sort of thing. But it also includes indirect costs that are not very specific amounts. It's more based on the cost of living in that area, for example. The cost to put gas in your car, pay your phone bill, some other miscellaneous costs, personal items, even some fund money, that's all built into this cost of attendance. So at Cloud, our cost of attendance may be about $21,000, but that's not what you're going to pay to go to Cloud. That is more so an estimate, so students are somewhat aware of approximately how much money may need to be available from one avenue or another to go to Cloud full-time for a typical fall-spring semester. About half of that would be what you would pay to Cloud if you were living on campus, for example. The other half of that is just your other living expenses. And that's going to just depends on the student's lifestyle at that point in time. But how we calculate what types of aid a student is eligible for is by taking that cost of attendance minus the student aid index that the FAFSA has spit out for us, and that determines how much financial need a student has, at least according to this calculation. In this scenario, I've used a kind of in-between student aid index. I've said the student aid index that the FAFSA gave us was 2,810. So in this scenario, we've said that the remaining need is $18,690. So that means that I can award need-based aid up to that $18,690, but the total amount of aid should not exceed that $21,500. So on this screen, I have starred the ones that are need-based aid. So the amount of grants, work study, and subsidized loans, and also outside scholarships should not exceed this student's remaining need, which is $18,690. But then the unsubsidized loan or parent plus loan could then fill in that gap, or essentially replace the student aid index of 2,810. And I know that's kind of in the weeds of what we do day to day, but I just like to make sure schools, because every student aid offer is going to use this term cost of attendance, and it can look a little scary to see $21,000 because you're like, I thought that it was a lot cheaper than that. So I just like to make sure that people are aware of that term and what that actually means. So when you're comparing student aid offers, looking at what that school's cost of attendance is in comparison to what the aid offer is, that can provide a lot of clarity on maybe which school maybe you're offering the best deal, essentially. The amount of Pell Grant awarded, and this would be specifically for students who are eligible for Pell Grant. This enrollment intensity phrase does not necessarily apply to other types of aid. It does change the cost of attendance, though. Because like I said, this cost of attendance I've said is based on being enrolled full-time, which means that you're enrolled in 12 credit hours or more. So that's generally 4 or 5 classes per semester. But if you're enrolled in less credit hours per semester, it goes down by credit hour, depending on what that. And I've just put in the maximum award here, so you have like a little bit of perspective of what that might look like depending on how many hours you're enrolled in. But this would apply to like summer, for example. Maybe if not this next summer, but the summer after that, you want to take a class during the summer, and you're a Pell eligible student. If you're enrolled in 6 credit hours, you would be eligible for half of the amount of Pell Grant that you're used to seeing, for example. Again, just some perspective of if you see different amounts at different points in time. Did you drop a class? Did you add a class? Those are things that also contribute to that. Okay, so I put a little snippet of what that symbol is going to look like on the FAFSA with that lovely circle and question mark. I would highly recommend, specifically on those asset questions, taking a look at that to detail what does or does not need to be included. I do recommend doing it early. We're kind of past the point now, but I typically would recommend waiting after the first week that it's open, just so they can kind of work out some of the kinks there a little bit. I also recommend not using your high school email to set up your federal student aid ID. That being said, if you have, it's okay. It's okay. But the reason for that is because you typically lose access to your high school email at some point in time. I mean, I've talked to schools that they keep it for 5 years, and it's really not a problem. If you lose, some lose it right away, some lose it after 6 months. It's just something that you would want to make sure you update if you get to that point.
2 months.
Okay,
No,
there you go.
2 years.
Oh, 2 years. Okay.
2 years.
Okay.
We usually keep the student emails NASA for about 2 years, because you'd be surprised how many students have actually come back and said, hey, back when I was a junior, senior, I did my resume or something like
Yes.
that.
Yep.
I need access to that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we generally keep it for
Great.
about 2 years, but then after that, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, if you set it up with your high school email, it's not absolutely not the end of the world. I would just go back in and update it with a personal email when you get the chance, or when that time comes. Again, making sure that parent is using parent email and phone number, student is using student email and phone number. Now's not the time to be like, oh, I don't have a personal email, I'll just put in my dad's. That's not the time to do that. You would be better off just setting up a Gmail real quick and doing that. That way you kind of have a different account that's like, this is what I use for all of my college communication. It's nice and professional. Or your high school email would also be the better alternative in that scenario. I just, again, want to point out, if you have any kind of special or unusual circumstance in your financial or family situation, making sure that you talk to your financial aid office of the school that you've kind of decided you're going to, because there is always a way to kind of work through those scenarios. You're not done if your financial situation is different year to year and you're like, oh, that's just the end of it, and I guess I didn't get anything. If it has changed, you may want to pursue that kind of avenue. So just making sure that you talk with your financial aid office. Once you submit the FAFSA, it takes about 3 to 5 days to reach your financial aid office. The exception to that would be right now, because thousands and thousands and thousands of people are completing FAFSAs, and we're getting a lot of those all at the same time. So it can take a little bit longer to reach the financial aid office, and then it's going to take just a little bit longer for the schools to actually review them and reach out to the student. So if you complete your FAFSA tonight, don't expect an email from any schools next week. If you do, that's great. That must be pretty proactive, but it would be pretty normal this time of year that you don't necessarily hear anything back specifically from the school. You should get a confirmation email from the Department of Ed that your FAFSA has been submitted, but you would not necessarily hear something from the school for another month, maybe 2. So don't let that deter you too much. If it gets to be, February or March and you still haven't heard anything, you might reach out at that point in time for sure. But I would just, don't stress that you did it wrong or anything. Like I said, as long as you got that confirmation from the Department of Ed that it's been submitted and you've checked that the school that you want to receive it is on there, you're good to just sit on that for a couple of months and be okay. I do recommend Well, so sorry. Once we get the FAFSA, we'll review it, and then we'll reach out to the student via the email that's on the FAFSA, so the email that's associated with your FSA ID. Another really great reason to make sure that that email is your email and an email that you check somewhat regularly. That way, if we're contacting you for some documentation of some kind, that those emails aren't just kind of going into oblivion, that they are reaching you and you're getting the information that we're asking for. Some students are selected for a process called verification. And it's kind of what it sounds like. That is a process where we would then need to verify that the information on the FAFSA is accurate. Because of that direct data exchange, we actually don't need to verify a ton of information anymore. It's usually just your family size. Is your family size on the FAFSA accurate? Because we know the taxes are accurate because that consent was provided. Or if there were no taxes to pull in, that direct data exchange is confirming that that is the case as well. So we're really just confirming that the number of people in your household is accurate, and we would just ask you to provide a list of the people that are in your family size. Yes.
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
There were a family of 4,
Okay.
and her sister graduates from college in May. Is
Okay.
she considered?
Generally, no. If she's not going to be in college from July 1, 2026 to June 30, 2027, she would not be included unless she is living in your household during that time. Then you would include her on that basis. But yeah, great question. So like I said, we would reach out at that point in time if we need any documentation from you to verify. Fraud is unfortunately a pretty large concern right now, and so sometimes what we need to verify is not so much the information on your FAFSA, but we need to verify that you are who you say you are. So in those situations, that you would need to present a valid ID to your school, generally in person, but if you're going out of state, that's not always possible. So you can also complete that with a notary if necessary. And it may not apply to you at all, but just in case you do hear terms like verification, that is what that is asking you to do, which they should detail in their communication to you as well. But once we don't need anything else, we would send you your aid offer letter. And generally that's going to at least include Pell Grants eligibility if you're eligible for that or not. It would also include at least some information about loans and what your eligibility might look like. And this is where I would really recommend that you read the aid offer letter that the school sends you from start to end. It can be a lot of information, and it's the information that we are legally obligated to send to you. But it also has things in it like, do you need to go into your student portal and accept, decline, adjust your aid in order for it to actually be applied to your student account? Because if you get your aid offer letter and you never accept it, you maybe did never actually get that aid. So that's a great time to make sure that, and every school does things just a little bit different. So it's just a really good time to, if you're going to read any email, that's a good one to read. And then all prior college transcripts generally need to be submitted to most schools, and that, especially if you've taken some, prior college credit while you're in high school, you would want to send that to your school. The whole point of that was that you don't, need to take it when you're in school. So make sure you get those sent to your colleges. And then we would also need your high school transcript for financial aid purposes. That's so we can verify that you have you meet that criteria to receive federal financial aid, that you have a high school diploma or equivalent. So what we do need to have on that for our purposes is your graduation date. So I would wait until May, generally, to get that sent to us. Again, depending on the school, it may depend on where it needs to go. Admissions or registrar office typically is. And you may need to submit an incomplete transcript at some point in time if they're talking about, getting you placed in a certain class or something like that. They may want to see an unofficial transcript, but that should generally just be something that you can probably access within your student portal and print off and give to them. But an official copy would always need to come directly from that school to the other school. That's what makes it official, is that it's not, passing through the student's hands on the way, essentially. Yeah, and then nothing in the final portion of that would be that it would not have any in-progress classes on it. And then again, in the case of a high school diploma, it would have the graduation date on it, or high school transcript. just another peek at what that timeline looks like if anyone needed to grab a quick look at that. And the last one I will talk about is the Kansas Promise Act. That is specific to community colleges and technical colleges. So if anybody is interested in those, it is a scholarship that the Kansas Board of Regents has specifically for those types of schools. That can pay, they call it a last dollar scholarship. And what it does is pay for anything that like federal aid or other scholarships doesn't already cover. The exception to that is housing. It won't cover any housing charges. So, but it can be a really good tool for somebody, for us. Our main ones are our ag program, our nursing program, our wind energy programs, or solar energy programs. Those are kind of our high wage, high demand fields that qualify for this. And so for students who are in those programs going to a community college and aren't eligible for Pell Grant, for example, this is a very good program to be a part of. So it can be really helpful in those situations. It's not for everybody. It does require that the recipient live and work in Kansas for 2 years after they've completed their program of study, and you must complete the degree within 36 months. But so it's a contract essentially that you would sign with K-Board to say that you will do all of those things. If you do not follow up on your end of the deal with K-Board, it would then essentially just turn into a loan. But it can be a really great scholarship for some students.
And I think it's important to note you must do the FAFSA.
Yes, correct. Yes. Yeah, because they have to see if you qualify for a full Pell Grant at a community college, oftentimes you're not going to be eligible for this because it already a full Pell Grant at Cloud, for example, is going to cover tuition fees, books and supplies already. The only thing left would be housing, which this scholarship does not pay for. So they do need you do have to do the FAFSA first to see what you qualify for. It does not include any loans, however. The only thing it takes into account is your outside scholarships coming from that school, and federal grants. So those are the ones that it would take into account there. So, but if you don't, again, specifically people who don't qualify for Pell Grant find this a very helpful tool. There are some income guidelines, but I will say they've waived those guidelines previously, so I would not, take that as a hard no. If you see your family size and income on here and think you don't qualify, I would not say that should totally deter you. They've waived that in the past, so it may be still worth it to go ahead and do an application for it, and that will be on the Kansas Board of Regents website, which is kansasregents.org. So. Highly recommend that. And then I just have our contact information up there. I've got the concurrent class information up there. Also our admissions information if you are interested in going to Cloud or setting up a visit or anything like that. Admissions would be who you would contact for that. There are 3 of us in my office that would be happy to help you with anything, regardless of whether you are coming to Cloud. We come visit schools to get the information out there. Obviously we'd love it if you become a T-Bird, but that's not the goal here. I'm not here to recruit. I'm sure they would love that, but that's not my job. So I'm just here to get information to people. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so me and my son were trying to set up our IDs or whatever, and we got mine set up, but when we went to set his up and he put in his phone number, it's saying his phone number is already linked to a different account.
So I've had this happen one other time. You could call federal student aid. I don't know that that's like my number one option on that. I've seen it happen before because sometimes phone numbers get recycled and it's associated with somebody else. That may be the only exception to using somebody else's phone number, at least to get it set up, because you can always change the contact information later.
So we could use my husband.
Yeah, because he sounds like he was not going to need to have one. So,
yeah,
that would be the exception, not the rule.
And once it's set up,
Yeah.
you can update.
Yeah, that would allow them to
Will
at least
it-
be able to set it
Will
up.
it let me put that number in later?
Um,
Since it's already put on another account?
It should, but I can't promise that. From my past experience, it did let us do it, but there's always the chance that they've decided not to do that. Yeah, that's probably what I would do in that situation, at least so that way the ball can get rolling. You can get it set up and going. At least it's a phone number that you trust.
Yeah.
And don't need to have on the FAFSA. Then I would try that. Try putting the correct one in afterwards. And then, it's probably not worth a phone call into federal student aid, but they do have a little chat box. That might be, I would probably do that option instead and just kind of tell them the scenario and they'll help you out. Like I said, my previous experience, it did let us put the phone number in after the fact.
Okay.
So my fingers crossed that is the case for you as well, but I would hate to promise anything.
Okay.
Anybody else? Good? Okay.
you.
All right, no
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you, guys. Oh, thanks.